The 9,545th meeting of the Security Council is called to order. The provisional agenda for this meeting is Security Council Resolutions 1160 of 1998, 1199 of 1998, 1203 of 1998, 1239 of 1999, and 1244 of 1999. The agenda is adopted. In accordance with Rule 37 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite the representative of Serbia to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. On behalf of the Council, I welcome His Excellency Mr. Aleksandar Vučić, President of the Republic of Serbia, and I request the protocol officer to escort him to his seat at the Council table. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I invite Ms. Caroline Ziade, Special Representative of the Secretary General and Head of the United Nations Interim Administration Mission in Kosovo, to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. In accordance with Rule 39 of the Council's Provisional Rules of Procedure, I also invite Mr. Albin Kurti to participate in this meeting. It is so decided. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw to the attention of Council members to the document S/2024/134, a letter dated 5th February 2024 from the Permanent Representative of Serbia to the United Nations addressed to the President of the Security Council. I now give the floor to Ms. Caroline Ziade. The Security Council will now begin its consideration of Item 2 of the agenda. I wish to draw to the attention of Council members to the document S/2024/134, a letter dated 5th February 2024 from the Permanent Representative of Serbia to the United Nations addressed to the President of the Security Council. I now give the floor to Ms. Caroline.
President, distinguished members of the Security Council, distinguished representatives, let me start by thanking you, Madam President, for this opportunity to brief the Council on the latest unfolding developments in Kosovo. Almost 1 year ago, 2 agreements were reached in Brussels on 27th of February and in Ohrid on 18th of March, setting forth a pathway toward negotiations and mutual engagement. However, with disagreement on the sequencing of the implementation, progress was stalled. Subsequent developments, such as the by-elections in 4 municipalities in northern Kosovo, resulting in mayors elected by barely 3.47% of eligible voters, the ensuing clashes around those municipality buildings on the 29th of May that resulted in significant injuries to civilians and to 93 KFOR personnel, and the serious security incident in Banjska on the 24th of September, still under investigation, that led to fatalities, were serious setbacks. Despite some positive momentum that re-emerged at the end of last year, with progress achieved over vehicle license plates, the energy roadmap, customs documentation, and the participation of the Kosovo Serbs in the initiation of the referendum to recall the mayors unilateral actions on issues that clearly fall within the political dialogue process and its governing agreements are cause for great concern. Regardless which side takes them and what justifications are provided, and in the absence of unambiguous public communications, such actions predictably exacerbate an environment of insecurity and mistrust. Madam President, recently, on the 27th of December 2023, the Central Board of Kosovo adopted a regulation and announced that as of 1st of February 2024, the only currency allowed for cash transactions in Kosovo will be the euro. Limited public explanation was offered, despite the fact that since 1999, the dinar has served as the de facto primary currency for cash and commercial transactions in Kosovo's Serb majority areas. Tens of thousands of individuals are affected, as is the economy, which depends upon their purchasing power. More specifically, the regulation interrupts the payment to individuals employed by Serbian-funded institutions in Kosovo, certain agricultural and social welfare subsidies, and recipients of pensions, small and medium-scale businesses, health and education services, including childcare, will also be severely affected, as they have for long also used to receive their funds from Serbia. This decision, particularly as related to the short deadline of its entry into force and the affected individuals' future access to basic economic and social services, became a matter of concern for local communities and international interlocutors. Subsequently, and in response to the obvious concerns this has raised, the Kosovo authorities on the 6th of February announced a transitional period of 1 month for implementation, accompanied by a communications campaign. Yet, not all concerns seems to be addressed regarding the cash flow in dinars, as a cash transfer truck was prevented entry into Kosovo on the 7th of February, while 4 million dinars confiscated by the Kosovo police on the 3rd of February in Pejapeć municipality still awaits judicial and administrative actions. Madam President, as highlighted by many international partners, such issues under the Brussels Agreement in 2013 and 2015, in which the association community of Serb majority municipalities in Kosovo was decided upon. I would like to reiterate, Madam President, that actions, regardless of their legality and justification, must take into consideration their impact on affected population. Otherwise, such actions not only increase tensions, but also weaken the potential for lasting peace and security across all communities in Kosovo. In the spirit of conflict prevention, more should be done to win the hearts and minds of non-majority communities. Madam President, on 26th of January and 2nd of February, Kosovo police conducted operations targeting facilities used by the Serbian non-majority communities in the municipalities of Dragaš, Pejapeć, Kline Klina, and Istok Istok, as well as a community health center in Pristina. The Kosovo police announced that in all 4 municipal locations, various documents were seized, buildings were sealed, staff were taken into custody for questioning and later released. Also, during an earlier police operation in Pejapeć on the 2nd of January, a team of journalists from Goraž Debac, the only Kosovo Serbian media outlet in that region, reported being stopped and searched, despite having presented valid press credentials. As you know, Madam President, UNMIC and our main partners place the highest importance upon ensuring the freedom of the media and the freedom of expression at all times. Madam President, neither the Central Bank of Kosovo's news regulations nor these recent Kosovo police operations have contributed to de-escalation as repeatedly called for by international interlocutors. In that regard, I cannot overstate the critical deterrent role KFOR continues to play on the ground today. Madam President, in all my statements, including the latest on the 6th of February, I reaffirm the importance of upholding the rule of law, free from political influence, and also reiterated that all related actions must be anchored in the principles of human rights. I will continue to call on both Pristina and Belgrade to engage actively and in good faith in the EU-facilitated dialogue as the venue for tackling the most sensitive policy issues that affect the communities. It is crucial that efforts towards negotiated and mutually accepted solutions do not falter. Continuous effort to build greater mutual trust and respect are the only viable path to stability, prosperity, and security. Madam President, history has repeatedly shown that just solutions do not emerge from unilateral actions, but rather from a sustained and painstaking commitment to open communication and dialogue. We will continue our efforts to encourage all stakeholders to prioritize trust and building it, not only at the grassroots level, but at all levels, including between communities and institutions. Trust develops only in an atmosphere that fosters mutual respect, open communication, fairness, and both the perception and the reality of equal treatment. In closing, let us remember again that the only acceptable path ahead is one that is grounded in dialogue and compromise, embraces human rights, and ensures the equitable application of the rule of law. I can assure you, Madam President, that UNMIC remains committed to providing good offices towards this ultimate goal. And I thank you for your attention.
I thank Ms. Ziadeh for her briefing, and I now give the floor to His Excellency Mr. Alexander Vučić, President of the Republic of Serbia.
Dear Madam President of the Security Council, distinguished members of the delegations, I extend my deep appreciation to the Security Council for the quick convening of this session. It has paramount importance, and it is truly necessary because of the ongoing situation in the territory of Kosovo and Metohija, which is absolutely contrary to the UN Charter and relevant Security Council resolutions. In concrete terms, the provisional institutions of self-government in Pristina have created in the respective territory the unbearable living conditions for Serbs, and they are now carrying out widespread systematic attacks against Serb civilians, as well as their persecution. Such a situation, in the absence of appropriate reaction, could cause irreparable harm to the survival of the Serbian people in Kosovo and Metohija. At a Security Council session dedicated to the 6-month UNMIC report, the Republic of Serbia regularly informs this Council and the international public of the ongoing situation, and particularly of the very difficult position of Serbian and other non-Albanian population in Kosovo and Metohija. The Republic of Serbia asked for this extraordinary session of the Security Council precisely because current events and Pristina's activities are of such nature that they can cause the irreparable harm also into period until the convening of the session that would be dedicated to the 6-month UNMIC report. Direct occasion for which we asked for this session is recent move of the so-called Kosovo Central Bank, by which payment transactions with the Serbian currency dinar is banned in the territory of Kosovo and Metohija as of 1st February. Having done this, the so-called leadership's continuous set of attacks against Serbs and other non-Albanian population in Kosovo and Metohija culminated being that their survival in the territory of southern Serbian province depends to a large extent directly on dinar assets coming first and foremost from the budget of the Republic of Serbia. Data that the Republic of Serbia pays 60,946 salaries and pensions from its budget in dinars, 2,430 student tuitions, and that it finances soup kitchens that meet basic needs of approximately 2,000 socially most vulnerable citizens, illustrate that this measure is an attack, first of all against the Serbian population, and that it makes the situation in the territory of Kosovo and Metohija difficult. These numbers alone clearly demonstrate that the huge number of people in the territory of Kosovo and Metohija directly or indirectly depend on dinar incomes from the budget of the Republic of Serbia. Due to that, it is obvious that the ban of dinar payment transactions, i.e. decision to abolish dinar as the legal tender, deprives directly huge number of people of their basic personal means of living. Additionally, one should have in mind that around 6,794 Serbian and non-Albanian farms in the territory of Kosovo and Metohija depend directly on dinar subsidies from the Republic of Serbia, while the survival of 922 business entities owned by the Serbs in Kosovo and Metohija, which are directly dependent of dinar payment transactions, is no longer operationally viable or possible. To sum up, with a decision to ban dinar payment transactions, Prishtina's regime directly disables any operation of all medical, educational, social, cultural, and other institutions that enable Serbs to provide themselves and their families with basic provisions, to have education, to get medical treatment, buy medications, and do everything that is considered to be ordinary life with a minimum of human dignity. Precisely, these institutions are the basis for establishment of the community of Serb-majority municipalities, whose competencies and structure are clearly defined in the Agreement on General Principles signed in 2015. Article 17, Item D of this agreement defines clearly that Serbia has the right to finance this CSM, among other things, education and healthcare, within this agreed institutional framework of Serb-majority municipalities in Kosovo and Metohija. Any prevention of financing Serbian schools, kindergartens, faculties, hospitals, and infirmaries is a direct blow to both survival of Serbs and to the establishment of the CSM. However, it is obvious that precisely creation of unbearable living conditions and depriving the Serbs of the possibility of survival is the only objective of the regime in Pristina, which through the respective act of structural violence intensifies years-long, well-planned and systematic attack against Serbian population, and by which open persecution of Serbs from Kosovo and Metohija has begun. In that sense, I shall disfigure with facts the complete absence of any grounds of the argumentation of the regime in Pristina, claiming that a measure to abolish dinar and introduction of euro as the only legal tender has been taken solely with the purpose of providing alleged rule of law. Please bear in mind that the so-called Kosovo Albanians leadership uses the term rule of law solely to harm Serbs and Serbian Orthodox Church. It is so widespread and drastic, usual practice, that provisional institutions of self-government have been publicly and openly denying for 8 years to deliver on final decision of their own Supreme Court on giving back the land that is owned by the Serbian Orthodox monastery Visoki Dečani. If we have in mind that this is how Pristina refers to the implementation of the principle of rule of law in case of the UNESCO World Cultural Heritage, which is under 24/7 protection of KFOR and purely Albanian inhabited environment, and which is inhabited by the Serbian Orthodox Church monks, I believe it is clear what kind of conditions ordinary Serbian population is subjected to by Pristina, and they are also the subject of the so-called declarative protection of the Pristina's alleged rule of law. In the context of Pristina's so-called rule of law that the Serbs are subjected to, allow me to mention another illustrative example. So-called judiciary, which has been massively persecuting Serbs in Kosovo and Metohija and potential Serbian returnees under the false accusations of war and other crimes simply made the decision that member of illegal so-called Kosovo security forces Azem Kurtaj, who on Christmas Eve 2023 had shot from his service gun Serb child Stefan Stojanovic, 11 years old, and his cousin Miloš, 21 years old, should be released pending trial, but not to defend himself from accusation for obvious attempted murder of a child, but for an offense that is equivalent to provoking public danger, like when someone, let's say, throws firecrackers for the New Year's Eve. In that regard, one must keep in mind that this is only one out of even 470 unpunished, technically motivated attacks against Serbs, Serbian Orthodox Church and their property since 2021, since the so-called Kosovo Albanian leadership is led by Albin Kurti, who is now at the forefront of persecution of Serbs. Among those incidents that have begun in 2021 are also dramatic cases of endless police beating-ups and harassments of Serbs, and even brutal and unprovoked shooting at Dragiša Galjak and 4 more Serbs, which Pristina regime did not find worthy of formal investigation. Just as a comparison, for the entire 9 years prior to Kurti's coming to power in 2021, there had been totally 669 registered such ethnically motivated attacks, which is an increase of 300%. So, Pristina's regime, which in the aforementioned way creates unbearable living conditions, places Serbs outside of the law and persecutes them, claims now that the decision on abolishing legal tender dinar was made in order to implement the rule of law. Even though this factual contradiction reveals that this is not about some even formal rule of law, but solely about the mechanism for finalizing the creation of unbearable living conditions for Serbs and for their persecution. I will point out to another indisputable fact. It seems indisputable that euro was introduced in the territory of Kosovo and Metohija as the only legal tender in an obviously illegal way, because it was done by the unilateral decision of the political leadership in Pristina. It is undisputable not only due to the fact that dinar is the legal tender in the Republic of Serbia, and therefore it cannot be banned in Kosovo and Metohija as the part of the territory of the Republic of Serbia, which is placed under international administration by UN Security Council Resolution 1244. This dangerous measure of the regime in Pristina was taken illegally also because euro is the legal international currency issued by the European Central Bank. Due to that, it is obvious that Pristina leadership resorted to illegal use of euro, which is said in publicly available information of the European Union and the European Central Bank, which says on its official web presentation that the so-called Kosovo quotation adopted the euro unilaterally in 2002 and have since used it as their de facto currency. This means that the euro is not legal tender there, but is treated as such by the population. Therefore, imposing the euro in this case was undeniably done not for the purpose of any rule of law, but without any legal basis and appropriate arrangements with the European Union, and only and exclusively for the purpose of completing the creation of unbearable living conditions for Serbs and their expulsion from Kosovo and Metohija. We emphasize once again that the decision to abolish the circulation of the dinar, i.e. the abolition of the dinar as a legal means of payment in the territory of Kosovo and Metohija, is only one in a series of planned, well-organized, long-implemented and systematic measures of Pristina which attack the Serbian population above all and whose ultimate goal is to finally create unbearable living conditions and expel Serbs from the territory. The difficult situation in the territory of Kosovo and Metohija, especially the position of the Serb population, drastically deteriorated after the April elections in 4 municipalities in the north of Kosovo and Metohija. After the political representatives of the majority Serb population in those municipalities, due to increased repression and political disenfranchisement, left the provisional institutions of self-government at the request of their voters, additional pressures and attacks by Pristina on the Serbian people followed. With the constant structural and physical violence of armed formations composed almost exclusively of Albanians, Pristina, contrary to the will of the Serbs, called and held elections in these 4 municipalities. For clear and justified reason, the Serbs boycotted these elections. More than 97% of the inhabitants of the north of Kosovo and Metohija are Serbs, so only 0.029% of the total number of Serbs and only slightly more than 3% of the total number of registered voters turned out for these so-called elections. The elections were held in completely undemocratic conditions and illegitimate Albanian mayors, forcibly occupied local self-governments with the help of heavily armored personnel of the alleged special police, that is, members of very well-equipped Albanian armed formations. This was followed by the removal of the symbols of Serbia and displaying the designations of the so-called Kosovo. Serbs who until then worked in local self-governments were forbidden to access their workplaces, and the municipal facilities themselves were fenced off and surrounded by barbed wire. Such a situation led to peaceful protests by Serbs, to which Albanian armed groups responded by injuring more than 50 Serbs on 29th of May alone. In that course of events, there was also tragic and reprehensible wounding of KFOR personal members that, for reasons incomprehensible to us, intentionally or unintentionally practically enabled the realization of Albin Kurti's goals. In those events, 4 Serbs were wounded from firearms, and 1 participant of the protest, Dragiša Galjak, was shot in the back from the automatic weapons. As we have already mentioned, no members of Prishtina's armed formations were processed for this violence against the Serbs. After the respective developments, the US Secretary of State, the EU High Representative Borrell, and NATO Secretary General Stoltenberg, as well as almost all international officials, were clearly and directly accusing Pristina of escalation in the ground. No doubt that was done by Russian, Chinese, and all the other officials that have never recognized Kosovo's independence. In spite of that, at the European Political Community meeting in Chisinau, I was asked to call the Serbs to sign the petition for replacement of Albanian mayors in Serb-majority municipalities in the north by President Macron and Chancellor Scholz. I told them not to push Serbs, who were under brutal repression, to sign the petition and not to humiliate them by them. I told them that the respective position made no sense, because it is obvious that nobody anywhere in Europe can be legally and legitimately in power if elected with 3% of votes of total numbers of voters. In this case, this is how Albanians were elected in environments where Serbs make 97% of population. Unfortunately, nobody wanted to listen to that and help ending Kurti's crimes. Instead of asking unconditional de-escalation from Pristina, they asked Serbs to unconditionally take part in new elections that Kurti had no intention of organizing and enabling. Additionally, they asked Serbia to lower the level of combat alert of armed forces and reduce the number of soldiers close to administrative line to the usual level, without being previously informed that in that moment there were even less Serbian soldiers than it usually was the case. We had almost immediately met the requests, while Pristina was allegedly sanctioned with the introduction of measures under which it is being equipped by modern weapons by those who imposed measures against it. In the first place, when we asked which international legal document envisages existence of any other armed formation in Kosovo and Metohija apart from KFOR, and according to which document they supply those illegal Albanian formations with weapons, the answer we get is that those who do the respective are powerful, that they recognize the so-called independence of Kosovo, that they do not care about the UN Security Council Resolution 1244 and the UN Charter, and that they can do whatever they please. Those who are supplying weapons to illegal armed formation of Kosovo Albanians do not stop talking about the territorial integrity of Ukraine. We don't mind that. But we do mind that in the place it is only the territorial integrity of the Republic of Serbia and Kosovo and Metohija that is not respected, and that is being undermined and violated, and the respective is explicitly guaranteed by the UN Security Council Resolution 1244 and the UN Charter. Due to all the aforementioned, it is logical that many months of Belgrade's efforts to find a solution to this problem in cooperation with the international community were not fruitful. Although it is a fact that the international community marked Pristina as the sole culprit for this escalation, Pristina basically did not face serious consequences for its actions. But the terror against the Serbian population has intensified, which includes, among other things, physical attacks on Serbs, the shutdown of their institutions and attacks on their property and the private property of the Serbian Orthodox Church. This is quantitatively confirmed by the data that in 2023, 179 ethnically motivated attacks on Serbs were recorded, while as many as 21 such attacks have already been recorded since the beginning of this year. This is a case of institutionalized physical and structural violence, which is accompanied by the incursions of Albanian armed groups into institutions financed by the Republic of Serbia and their shutdown, attacks on shipments of money intended for the payment of salaries, pensions, scholarships, and social benefits, then by arrests and harassment of healthcare and postal workers who in a lawful and the same way as in the previous quarter of a century transparently try to deliver money to those whom it belongs, and also by many other acts of violence. I particularly emphasize that Pristina is viewing armed formations more and more openly and recklessly in carrying out the persecution of Serbs. Those formations are composed exclusively of Kosovo Albanians, and their existence on the territory of Kosovo and Metohija is undeniably illegal and contrary to the UN Security Council Resolution 1244. Since November 2022, various such armed formations have used illegal and disproportionate force against the Serbian population 98 times, of which 83 times in the area of the north of Kosovo and Metohija. Using the mechanisms of provisional institutions in the period since November 2022, they carried out 38 incursions into the north of Kosovo and Metohija, and with the illegal expropriation of land privately owned by Serbs and Serbian Orthodox Church, established a continuous presence in this area where Serbs make more than 97% of the population. Those armed groups also carry out arbitrary arrests of prominent Serbian individuals in that region and other known forms of physical and institutional violence against the Serbian population. Among other things, they carry out acts of mass intimidation of the Serbian population through, number one, obstructing the freedom of movement of Serbs through reasonless stops, humiliating treatment, beatings, and even other violent acts at illegally established armed checkpoints and all other locations in the entire north. Two, unjustifiably opening fire and the almost constant presence of armored fighting vehicles in peaceful urban areas. Three, illegal expropriation of land privately owned by Serbs, which they then used to build new military facilities in that area. Four, adopting decisions on confiscation of buildings owned by Serbian institutions which have been the owners of those facilities for more than 1 century. Five, the violent seizure of the property of the Serbian Orthodox Church, thus violating the special protection zones around the Serbian Orthodox Church facilities. Six, plowing and destruction of Serbian cemeteries. Seven, the imposition of an illegal embargo on Serbian goods and confiscation of legal goods owned by Serbian traders. Unfortunately, the list of illegal activities does not end there, and it is much longer when actions against Serbs in all other areas of Kosovo and Metohija, which they still inhabit, are included. As a reminder, according to Resolution 1244, armed groups of Albanians had to be demilitarized according to paragraph 9b, paragraph 15, and article 6, annex 1 of the UN Security Council Resolution 1244, which implies a ban on their reformation in one form or another. Providing them with modern military equipment is undoubtedly contrary to that resolution. The violence and persecution that Pristina is now openly carrying out against Serbs is a natural part of the long-term systematic and widespread attack on the Serbian civilian population throughout Kosovo and Metohija. In the past year alone, obviously due to the described physical and structural violence of Pristina institutions towards the Serbian population, more than 14% of Serbs left Kosovo and Metohija. It is tragic that Pristina is carrying out the aforementioned actions while at the same time, with the mediation of the EU, the dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina has been in progress for many years, which the United Nations General Assembly in a resolution from 2010 designated as an instrument for strengthening security and cooperation, progress on the path to the EU, and improvement of people's lives. Its basic formal scope is certainly the first agreement of principles governing the normalization of relations dated 19th of April 2013, which obliged Pristina to establish the community of Serb municipalities. Its formation in accordance with the agreement from 2013 and 2015, which Pristina persistently refuses to implement, would create an atmosphere in which Serbs would have at least a chance for a dignified life and protection from persecution and violence. That is why, in the conditions of the ongoing persecution of Serbs, it became quite clear why Pristina refused to fulfill the obligation to form the community of Serb municipalities. Instead of creating conditions for the survival of Serbs in the territory of Kosovo and Metohija, we are witnessing well-planned, systematic, and widespread measures that deliberately create unbearable living conditions and persecute Serbs, thus rendering the physical survival of the Serb population on the territory of Kosovo and Metohija impossible. And what we speak about here is not about wonky dialogue, but full legalism from Pristina's side. The current situation in the territory of Kosovo and Metohija is of such nature that it undoubtedly leads to the deterioration of the situation, international friction, and the emergence of disputes that pose a threat to international peace and security, since the political leadership of the Kosovo Albanians carries out systematic and widespread attacks against the Serbian population. In order to respond in advance to today's already inappropriate calls for restraint and responsibility by both parties, which unfortunately has become a kind of mantra in the statements of international actors on the situation in Kosovo and Metohija, it seems necessary to point to the policy of the Republic of Serbia, which is based on UN Charter, and when it comes to the situation on the territory of Kosovo and Metohija, on the strict respect for the resolutions of the Security Council. Serbia opposes all factors of instability and strives to be a solid pillar of stability in the Western Balkans region. For years, Serbia has been attracting record amounts of foreign direct investments, greater than the rest of the region's countries combined. Serbia's development plans are very ambitious. In 2027, we will host the Expo exhibition, having a particular impact on the development strategy, which has been worked out in detail throughout plan with the colorful name Leap into the Future. The very fact that Serbia, as a responsible country and a constructive international actor, addressed the UN Security Council, refraining so far from any unilateral response to the actions of Pristina. I believe that it is not in anyone's interest that in a world where too many hotspots have already been opened, the Balkans will once again become a zone of instability due to the blind and senseless hatred of the Pristina regime towards the Serbs living in Kosovo and Metohija. I hope that after today's meeting, even those members of the UN Security Council who recognize the illegal unilaterally declared independence of the southern Serbian province will understand that Pristina's latest moves are not just an attempt to consolidate something that a significant majority of UN members, including Serbia, do not recognize as a state, but to endanger and violate the peace. Pristina's attempt to implement the abolition of dinar payment transactions and remove the dinar as a means of payment is nothing more than another in a series of acts of persecution and a systematic and widespread attack on the Serbian population in one word, a crime against humanity. I also take this opportunity to thank to all of the officials from the United States and the EU and all our traditional friends from the East for reacting to Pristina's latest escalating moves with statements of condemnation. However, the recent seizure in Pristina of money intended for pensions and social benefits for Serbs, as well as the arrest and criminal prosecution of people who transferred that money in a completely transparent and legal manner, as in all years during the past quarter of century, irrefutably proves that the statements given were clearly not enough means to persuade Pristina to immediately end the persecution of the Serbs and turn away from attempts to destabilize the region. I'm not even sure that the request of certain international actors to postpone the implementation of the regulation is the right way, because in that way, Pristina is actually indirectly encouraged to continue making unilateral decisions with the technical procedural requirement that it just be more careful in choosing the moment and the manner of implementing those unilateral moves. The solution to this crisis, as well as to all other crises that Pristina has produced in the past period, can only be a clear order to immediately stop all the mentioned measures which deliberately create unbearable living conditions and carry out the persecution of Serbs, as well as decisive discouragement and preventing Pristina from resorting to any unilateral moves in the future concerning the Serbian people in Kosovo and Metohija. In this context, we ask the Security Council not to lose sight of the fact that in 2022, the Republic of Serbia, due to the described threat to the safety and survival of Serbs by armed Albanian formations, sent a request to the commander of KFOR that in accordance with Resolution 1244 and the military technical agreement from Kumanovo, enabled the return of the agreed number of Serbian security personnel who would assist international forces in protecting the Serbian population. Although the aforementioned international legal documents clearly provide for the obligation of the KFOR commander to enable such a return, this did not happen. The Republic of Serbia therefore calls on the Security Council, international organizations and countries that can influence the resolution of the crisis to take urgent and decisive measures with the aim of normalizing the situation in Kosovo and Metohija, preventing further persecution of Serbs, and creating conditions for the resumption of a meaningful dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina in accordance with the UN Charter and UN Security Council resolutions 1160, 1199, 1203, 1239, and 1244. The Republic of Serbia, for its part, will implement all agreements and undertake all necessary measures in accordance with the UN Charter and relevant resolutions of the UN Security Council. In closing, I want to thank all of you, dear representatives of the Security Council members, particularly those countries who strictly observe the UN Charter and the principles that international law is founded on, as well as all of you who showed readiness to listen to me and hear what Serbia has to say regarding the issue of Kosovo and Metohija and the necessity of protection of Serbian people from persecution carried out by provisional institutions of self-government in Pristina, which may bring to irreparable harm and that all of us together must avoid in the interest of preservation of life, peace and stability. Thank you, Madam President, once again.
I thank His Excellency Mr. Vučić for his statement, and I now give the floor to Mr. Albin Kurti.
Thank you, Madam President. Distinguished members of the Security Council, there is a deep and uncomfortable irony and, frankly, a dystopian feeling in responding to false allegations of human rights abuses made by a country known to have committed the last genocide of the 20th century, and a government that is currently one of the biggest authoritarian threats to regional peace and security. This very Security Council established the ICTY in 1993 because of horrific crimes and grave breaches of the Geneva Conventions. The Serbian government throughout the 90s ordered, planned, and committed murder, torture, mutilation, and rape, committing genocide in Srebrenica and in Kosovo. Feminist legal scholars have extensively shown how rape was used as a tool of war. The brutality of what was committed changed international human rights law forever. Out of this misery, Kosovo emerged from the war as a symbol of the fight for dignity and the triumph of human rights. And we did not grow bitter. We have built ourselves into a forward-facing, multicultural and multi-ethnic republic, and a growing and robust democratic state. 16 years after independence and a quarter century after war and devastation, today we stand tall and proud. A republic for all, a multi-ethnic society of all. Our government's dedication to democracy, rule of law, and human rights has bolstered both our economy and internal unity. Since the NATO intervention, we've actively engaged with numerous international allies to establish democratic and efficient institutions. In the last 3 years, our economy has surged with 6.2% average growth, doubled foreign direct investments and exports, and a 2/3 rise in tax revenues without substantial fiscal policy change. We've funneled this growth into the region's largest fiscal package, recognized by the World Bank, to directly aid citizens, families, and businesses in facing global energy and cost of living challenges. Kosovo is a success story of NATO intervention in the spring of 1999 and an inspiring lesson on how economic development and democratic progress can go hand in hand. This progress has been recognized by a number of international organizations. The 2023 Freedom House report ranks Kosovo first in the Western Balkans, second in Europe, and third globally for advancements in political rights and civil liberties. We improved by 22 places in just 2 years in the Reporters Without Borders World Press Freedom Index. Similarly, we jumped 21 places in the Transparency International's Corruption Perception Index since our government took office. Our growth and well-being are shared with minorities. We proudly have and enforce one of the constitutions with the highest protections of minority rights, which include 20 guaranteed seats in the parliament, out of 120, out of which 10 are for Serbs. For perspective, the entire population of Kosovo is approximately 1.8 million, and the Serbian community is about 4% of it. Serbs in Kosovo also run 10 out of 38 municipalities, so over 25% of them. We have made sure to allocate a substantial part of our budget to them and made sure that the Serbian language is an official language everywhere. We're actively working with the help of international governments and international NGOs to bolster these rights. Just last year, the Ministry for Communities and Returns, led by an ethnic Serb minister, allocated millions of for 265 grants to NGOs, farmers, and small businesses from non-majority communities. The majority of these funds went to Kosovo Serbs. This month, we're launching a new initiative to support employment for up to 2,000 residents of the 4 northern municipalities. This effort will be facilitated by our newly established employment agency office at the municipality of Leposavić, a Serbian majority municipality. The Ministry of Finance Kosovo's Generation Unlimited program provides paid internships for youth, awarded also to the Kosovo Serb youth. Our energy efficiency program subsidizes energy-efficient home heating equipment, with 17% of subsidies benefiting non-majority communities, including Kosovo Serbs. We've allocated funds for building and repairing homes in Serb communities and provided an additional 5.6 million euros to Serb majority municipalities this year. Education grants for these municipalities are over 20% higher per student compared to others. In the period of 2008-2022, the 10 Serb majority municipalities enjoyed, on average, a 62% larger budget per capita than the rest of Kosovo. And for 2024, the Ministry for Communities and Returns has the largest budget increase of all ministries, apart from the Ministry for Culture, Youth and Sports, which has the investment for the Mediterranean Games 2030. The Office of Prime Minister press releases are in Albanian and in Serbian language all of the time. In addition, government meetings are also live streamed both in Albanian and Serbian. The idea that Kosovo is conducting an ethnic cleansing campaign or prosecution against the Serb community is a lie, one that has been debunked by numerous public bodies. Last October, the European Parliament approved a resolution calling on Serbian authorities and media to refrain from hate speech against Kosovars and the dissemination of propaganda about ethnic cleansing and pogroms in Kosovo. Last year, the Helsinki Committee for Human Rights detailed how the Serbian government intentionally spreads fear regarding the false endangerment of Serbs in Kosovo in order to radicalize society and to create a toxic atmosphere in which an agreement with Kosovo would be rejected. The false claims have also been disproven by the European Stability Initiative, a think tank based in Berlin and Vienna that obtained documents directly from official Serbian institutions. Their official statistics on state health insurance, enrollments in schools, pension recipients, the birth rates in hospitals prove that the percentage of Serbs leaving Kosovo corresponds to that of those leaving Serbia. Therefore, Serbs who leave Kosovo, just as those who leave Serbia, do so to pursue opportunities in Western Europe, not to flee some fictional ethnic cleansing campaign. Instead, let's focus on Serbia's treatment of its ethnic Albanian population today, an ethnic cleansing campaign carried out administratively. The Serbian government has systematically removed over 4,200 ethnic Albanians from the civil registry in Medveđa and over 2,000 in Bujanos. This erasure has tangible consequences. Victims lose access to IDs, passports, medical services, social assistance, vehicle registration, property transactions, pensions, and voting rights, leaving them stateless. This discriminatory targeting constitutes a method of depopulation against the Albanian community in Serbia. Ethnic Albanian citizens are far from being the only target of Serbia's authoritarian regime. On the 2nd of January of this year, The Guardian's editorial board described the state of politics there as state capture. A few hours ago, the European Parliament adopted with overwhelming majority a resolution calling for an investigation into the elections held in December, citing manipulating results, aggressive rhetoric, verbal abuse, and Russian media actively engaging in disinformation on behalf of the government. Serbia has aligned itself with Russia. It is the only European country, except for Belarus, not to impose sanctions following Putin's invasion of Ukraine. And it acts as the Kremlin Trojan horse in southeastern Europe in a geopolitical war against the democratic world. When I was a political prisoner in Serbia at the age of 24 for 2 years and 7 months, I heard the guards loudly expressing joy and euphoria one day. It was September 11, 2001. Sadly, that violent anti-democratic sentiment prevails, and mafia, authoritarianism, and glorification of torture reigns supreme. I now turn to the Central Bank of Kosovo's recent regulation on cash operations, which entered into force on February 1st. Let me be absolutely clear. The regulation does nothing to prohibit or prevent the government of Serbia from providing financial support to Kosovo Serbs. Any suggestion to the contrary is nothing more than false propaganda aimed at inciting ethnic tensions. The regulation seeks merely to ensure the transparency and legality of cash imported into Kosovo in line with both our constitution and European Union monetary policy. The very same rules apply to all cash imports from any country in any currency. They do not ban transfers of dinars from Serbia any more than they ban transfers of dollars from US, pounds from UK, or for that matter, lek from Albania. The Central Bank of Kosovo is committed to doing all that it can to ensure that Kosovo Serbs are able to continue receiving financial support from Serbia uninterrupted and unimpeded. It has sent a letter to its counterpart, the National Bank of Serbia, proposing an agreement on the transfer of funds through legal and transparent means in full compliance with the new regulation. And our government is fully committed to ensure a smooth transition with sufficient time invested in education and information instead of imposing penalties for non-compliance. We are committed to jointly identify and promote the best available tools to ensure a continuation of financial transfers from Serbia towards legal municipalities or households. The central bank's regulation seeks not to harm any single group of citizens, but rather to protect all citizens of every ethnic community from the threats of organized crime, arms trafficking, and money laundering. All of these activities rely on the ability of criminal groups to receive illegally smuggled cash, largely across our border with Serbia. Citizens in the north of Kosovo, the overwhelming majority of whom are ethnic Serbs, are threatened day in and day out by such groups. Our Serb citizens face intimidation from criminal groups dictating their actions from protesting to voting. Disobedience results in violence, car burnings, and threats to family members. When Kosovo Serbs ask to meet with me, we cannot make the meetings public because their lives and livelihoods are threatened. This must stop. Belgrade cannot be permitted endlessly to finance its criminals and terrorists in Kosovo with undeclared and unregulated streams of money flowing freely and illegally into our country. And that, distinguished members of Security Council, is the real source of Belgrade's hysteria over the central bank's regulation. Belgrade has sounded the alarm not because of dinar exchange into euro, but because we are banning large sacks of money at the border. They are crying foul not out of concern for the plight of Kosovo Serb citizens, but because their convenient pipeline of illegal cash into the north of Kosovo is about to be shut off. This gathering and the propaganda and vitriol that has preceded it is nothing more than part of a ruthless campaign by an authoritarian regime. The Republic of Kosovo is fortunate to enjoy broad support from its international partners and allies in its fight against organized crime and corruption. The central bank and its regulations are just as essential to that fight as police, officers, prosecutors, and judges. In some ways, we are not surprised that Serbia would create problems out of democratic procedure. Since the end of the war, the Serbian government, run by many of the people who held senior positions in the Milosevic government, including Mr. Vučić, Milosevic's information propaganda minister, has mustered all its power and imagination to find new ways to terrorize Kosovo. Unsurprisingly, Serbia not only promotes genocide denialism, but also violently enforces it. After Serbian opposition leader Nikola Sandulović apologized for Serbia's war crimes in Kosovo and laid flowers on the grave of a 7-year-old victim, the Serbian Secret Service arrested him early this January and beat him until he was unconscious, leaving him paralyzed. Meanwhile, Kosovo-Serbian journalist Radomir Dimić, who has resided in Serbia, has publicly stated that he plans to return to Kosovo because Mr. Vučić's authoritarian regime has made life unbearable for journalists. And as we speak now, he has arrived in Kosovo. Sadly, even 25 years after the war, Serbia persists in its attempts to violently reclaim Kosovo. A glaring instance of this occurred on September 24th last year. Around 80 paramilitary troops, organized and supported by Serbia, launched an unprovoked attack on a Kosovo police patrol, resulting in the death of one police sergeant, Afrim Bunjaku, and injuries of 2 others. Despite the terrorist attempt to use innocent Serbian pilgrims as human shield in a monastery aiming to exploit any casualties for anti-Kosovo propaganda, our police forces' professionalism averted civilian casualties. Then, on September 27, Serbia declared an official 3-day mourning period for the terrorists killed in the Kosovo police anti-terror operation. And you notice today that Mr. Vučić was recalling several Serbs being wounded or injured in different incidents, but he did not mention 3 killed Serbs. Why he did not mention them? Because he knows that they were terrorists which were financed, supported, orchestrated by him. That's why the 3 killed Serbs were not mentioned at all. And on September 29th, the White House National Security Council drew the world's attention to an unprecedented deployment of Serbian tanks, troops, and heavy artillery along the Kosovo-Serbia border. Only after US and other international pressure did Serbia finally draw down its forces. Meanwhile, Kosovo police discovered a disturbing set of documents left behind by the terrorists in their hasty retreat back to Serbia. The documents show that the September 24 attack had been part of a larger plan to violently annex the north of Kosovo via a coordinated assault on 37 distinct positions. A corridor was then to be established to enable a continuous supply of arms and troops from Serbia. In the subsequent months, Serbia has rejected international calls to extradite the terrorists to Kosovo or otherwise hold them accountable. The paramilitary leader of the September 24th attack, Milan Radojic, the US and UK sanctioned former vice president of the Belgrade-sponsored political party in Kosovo, Lista Srpska, still roams free in Serbia, just as Serbia itself has thus far escaped international sanctions for its role in the attack. Radojic has an outstanding arrest warrant by Interpol that was issued this past December and that Serbia has ignored. This impunity is both unacceptable and dangerous. As President Biden stated in October of last year, history has taught us that when terrorists don't pay a price for their terror, when dictators don't pay a price for their aggression, they cause more chaos and death and more destruction. They keep going. These are wise words. Serbia must be held to account for its terror and aggression. Otherwise, it will keep going. Serbia's increasingly alarming acts of aggression and terrorism make it all the more urgent that it fulfill its obligations under the basic agreement reached between our countries on February 27 of last year. The agreement was facilitated by the European Union and reflects Europe's renewed engagement in resolving the main dispute between Kosovo and Serbia. It has also been endorsed as legally binding by the United States. The European Union's obligation in the dialogue emanate from UN General Assembly resolution 64/298. Accordingly, on May 12th of last year, the EU notified the Secretary General that an agreement between Kosovo and Serbia had been reached. The next logical step would be for the EU to formally register that agreement with the United Nations. The basic agreement sets a benchmark of de facto recognition based on the 1972 Basic Treaty between the East and West Germany. The agreement's text expressly invokes the UN Charter as the guiding light governing the relations between our countries. It imposes on parties a number of obligations, including to develop good neighborly relations as specified in Article 1, to engage with one another on the basis of sovereign equality, and to respect one another's territorial integrity as specified in Article 2, to refrain from the threat or use of force as specified in Article 3, and Serbia's obligation not to object to Kosovo's membership in any international organizations as specified in Article 4. The chief innovation of the agreement is to elevate de facto relations between our countries to the level of sovereign equals beyond the mere recognition of documents, symbols, and institutions, and a minor upgrade of liaison officers. Unfortunately, nearly a year after the agreement was reached, Serbia seems to be suffering from a severe case of buyer's remorse. Its Prime Minister, Madam Ana Brnabić, sent a letter to the EU on December 13, stating that the agreement isn't legally binding. Serbia also rejects two key obligations: not to object to Kosovo's international membership and not to respect its territorial integrity. This refusal, particularly the later, suggests a willingness to retain the option of invading Kosovo. Against this background, signing the agreement is not a mere formality. It's the only guarantee for its full and unconditional implementation, Kosovo's national security and regional peace. Despite my repeated offers, Mr. Vučić has refused to sign. I invite him, present at this meeting, to sign here and now, emphasizing the UN Charter's crucial role in our agreement and relations. The symbolic act would demonstrate his commitment to peaceful and neighborly relations with Kosovo. Kosovo is primarily known worldwide for the massacres and ethnic cleansing under the Milosevic regime. But few realize this was just the latest chapter in a century-long history of state crimes against Kosovar Albanians, starting with Ilija Garashinin in 19th century. Leading Serbian figures devised 24 plans for the deportation or extermination of Kosovo Albanians. Our people's history represents one of the greatest, yet internationally unrecognized anti-colonial struggles of the 20th century. While the genocide in the 90s marked a climax, our oppression began long before and resonates with citizens across many nations. Acknowledging the painful history of oppression and violence endured by our people, we are committed to safeguarding the rights of all individuals. Our past experiences have instilled in us a profound desire to create a safe and inclusive environment for everyone. As a nation that has overcome immense adversity, we aspire to serve as a beacon of solidarity and respect for human rights. Thank you.
I thank Mr. Kurti for his statement, and I now give the floor to those council members who wish to make statements. I give the floor to the representative of the Russian Federation.
Спасибо.
Thank you, Madam President. We are grateful to the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Ms. Caroline Ziad, for her briefing on the situation in Kosovo and to the information she provided us with. We welcome the participation in our meeting today of the President of Serbia, Mr. Aleksandar Vučić, and we listened to what was said by Mr. Kurti. We are grateful to the Presidency of Guyana for expeditiously convening the request of Serbia and Russia of a Security Council meeting on Kosovo. Unfortunately, in addition to the hotspot in Gaza, out of which Israel is trying to do everything to push out Palestinians from, we are currently witnessing the additional risk of adding one more on the Balkans, where a similar situation, similar facts on the ground are being created by the Kosovo authorities against the ethnic Serbs. And Mr. Kuti has just called them, in this room, had just called them criminals and terrorists. The problem has reached such a scale that the Serbian population of the Kosovo province is now witnessing a direct threat to their physical survival. In their attempt to try and have a total control over Kosovo and get rid of the non-Albanian population, the authorities in Pristina organized in true anti-Serbian terror. And the goal here is obvious, to create an impossible conditions for the life of the Kosovo Serbs, to make sure that they leave their homes forever. And let me be frank, under the very noses of our American and European colleagues who indulge Pristina, today in Kosovo and Metohija, we're witnessing a policy which gives rise to blood-curdling associations with a very real ethnic cleansing, and which the Western self-proclaimed advocates of universal human rights are doing their best to ignore. They're being used many ways at the same time to chase away the citizens which are not favored by the Kosovo regime. For example, the harmful activity of Pristina proxies in the 4 municipalities continues. There's continued embargo on the Serbian goods. As a result, over this year, as we just heard from Mr. Vucic, more than 40% of Serbs left the province. The immediate cause for the convening of the meeting today was the illegal decision made by Pristina to ban the circulation of the Serbian dinar in the province. This is a criminal and deceitful step, and this makes the life of ordinary citizens basically unbearable, because about 100,000 non-Albanians risk being left with their pensions, scholarships, and salaries. Not to mention the fact that the functioning of humanitarian institutions is at risk, and this includes kindergartens, hospitals, schools, companies, factories. This is not an economic. This is a true political and discriminatory measure which undermines all efforts made by the international community to find compromises and lasting solutions in a dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina. As a result, what we have is a direct risk that there will be a new outbreak of violence in the Balkans. We are convinced that under these conditions, the Security Council must rein in the Kosovo leaders who are trying to, without any justification for that, turn the dialogue with Belgrade into a tool for settling a status issue, contrary to the provisions of Security Council Resolutions 2044, which confirms the sovereignty of Serbia over Kosovo and Metohija. Madam President, the atmosphere of hatred, which is at a critically high level in Kosovo, is being expressed in hostile rhetoric and intimidation on the part of Pristina special forces. Regular attacks against Serbs, their property, is systematic acts of vandalism against Orthodox sacred places. There are gross violations of the electoral rights of non-Albanian citizens, their property is being illegally expropriated. Serbian companies and administrative and municipal structures are being drawn down by force. A heightening of psychological pressure is taking place. For example, in 2023 alone, 178 ethnically motivated attacks against Serbs and their property were committed. There's a campaign now to usurp and albanize the Serbian cultural heritage. The history of Kosovo and Metohija is being rewritten. Churches are being taken over. Old Orthodox places of worship are being named Catholic. And the traces of long presence of Serbs on that land are being erased. In December last year, for example, Pristina, once again without any consultations with the Serbian Orthodox Church, named 2 Middle Eastern Orthodox churches in the North Catholic and started their supposedly repairs. Another egregious instance was this January. The Kosovo Albanians organized a hostile takeover of the Hostan, Our Lady of Hostan Monastery of 13th century on the west of the province. Another shocking thing is a consistent stance by the provisional institutions of self-government in Pristina to sabotage the implementation of their key and essentially the only commitment they undertook almost 11 years ago in the course of the dialogue with Serbia, conducted with EU mediation. I refer to the commitment by Pristina to create within Kosovo and Metohija of a community of Serb majority municipalities. This mechanism, which is stated in Brussels agreements, was created as a bridge for cooperation, building trust amongst ordinary people between the Serbian and Albanian peoples, and also as a necessary institutional barrier against attempts to discriminate against Serbs and persecute them. It is also very difficult not to notice that in Kosovo there's a domination of Kosovo armed groups. They're dominated by Kosovo Albanians, and their very existence is a violation of Resolution 1244. In line with that resolution, these groups have to be demilitarized, which means that there is a ban on their being reconstituted in any way, shape, or form. In actual fact, what we're seeing in the province is true lawlessness. Serbs are being deprived of their legal right to vote at the Serbian referendum and elections in 2023. They're prosecuted, and their crimes against humanity. There's a widespread arbitrary arrests of prominent Serbians and mass intimidation and physical and institutional violence against Serbs. The president of Serbia today told us in detail about all of that. Let me just add that the scale of this lawlessness is staggering. It's hard to believe that this is happening in this day and age at the very heart of Europe. It is even more striking when you realize that people in Washington and Brussels are looking at it absolutely calmly and pretending that nothing terrible is taking place. The European Union, instead of demanding that there be a settlement within existing international legal frameworks, which were approved and confirmed by themselves, is blackmailing Belgrade and is talking about introducing into the Serbian negotiating dossier the oral agreements reached with Pristina in February-March 2023 and is trying to make them legally binding. At the same time, the Brussels agreements themselves are completely ignored. In other words, the words uttered by Brussels are nothing but an empty sound. It is a very good illustration of how it's impossible to negotiate with the European Union today, how they failed as a mediator between Belgrade and Pristina. At the same time, Serbia sees placed upon itself dishonest and unjust demands to recognize Kosovo and agree to its membership in multilateral entities, including the UN. And at the same time, the West is moving towards accepting the province into the Council of Europe. It's unprecedented where a candidate is not a state. In other words, the so-called rules-based order is being put to full use by the West, trampling international law in the process. Madam President, in order to understand how we can have lasting peace on the Serbian land, we need to recall the true reason for the current dramatic events. And the reason for that is the aggression by NATO against the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia. In March, it will be 25 years since the beginning of inhuman destruction by the Americans and their allies of peaceful citizens in the very heart of Europe. The so-called advocates of democracy started bombing the country using depleted uranium, and this resulted in mass casualties amongst peaceful citizens and the destruction of civilian infrastructure. Catastrophic damage was also done against the environment. And this is something that NATO will be cursed by 60 future generations of people who will have health issues because of the crimes committed by Washington, crimes which the former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright called collateral damage. Today, Washington and its allies continue actively supporting the aggressive stance by Kosovo Albanians against Serbs. The United States, one of the founding members of the UN and a permanent member of the Security Council, are even publicly and officially talking about their intent to violate its resolutions. For example, the Pentagon is loudly and clearly saying that it's planning to give Pristina 24 anti-tank Javelin missiles and 246 munitions for it. This is a provocative step and will be a gross violation of Security Council Resolution 1244. Inspired by Washington, Kosovo Albanians today are already openly saying that Kosovo, as it exists today, is just and I quote, a temporary project towards unification with Albania. End of quote. At the same time, they're announcing a rearming of the Kosovo so-called policemen and introducing by 2028 a mandatory military service in the province. As we all know, such steps within the framework of the transforming the so-called Kosovo security forces into an army would also be a violation of Security Council Resolution 1244. We must state here that in addition to what I said just now, we also have our own questions to what is being done by Pristina. But we think it would be more appropriate to discuss them in the course of the April meeting of Security Council on the activity of the United Nations Interim Administration Mission in Kosovo. The work done by this mission is very much needed under these difficult conditions, and this means that they need to keep or probably increase their personnel and funding. We call upon Security Council members to take urgent measures to protect the Kosovo Serbs and demand that Pristina stop their persecution, including ending all discriminatory measures against them. We are convinced that the only way to having peace on Serbian land lies through developing a sustainable and mutually acceptable international legal solution between Belgrade and Pristina on the basis of Security Council Resolution 1244. Such a solution should meet the interests of Belgrade and the Serbian people and be approved by the UN Security Council. I thank you.
I thank the representative of the Russian Federation for their statement, and I now give the floor to the representative of Malta.
Thank you, Madam President, and I also thank Sergi Ziader for her briefing. I also welcome the President of Serbia and the Prime Minister of Kosovo to today's meeting. Malta has been following closely the latest developments in Kosovo. We are concerned about the sudden decision by its central bank to ban cash transactions in dinar in its territory. The closure of several offices of Serbian-run institutions, as well as the Centre of Peace and Tolerance in Pristina, also raises serious concerns on the living conditions of Kosovo Serbs. We reiterate that unilateral actions implemented without due notification and consultation, especially actions that directly affect ethnic minorities, only serve to destabilize the situation in the region and increase the risk of violence. We welcome that since the announcement by the central bank was made, the government of Kosovo has taken heed of the concerns raised. It has committed to a transition period and a communication campaign regarding the impact of the regulation. We stress that this period must be sufficiently long to allow those impacted to access alternate methods of payment. Malta urges both sides to focus on all efforts on easing tensions and to refrain from any further unilateral action or divisive rhetoric that could undermine diplomatic efforts. Positive steps to create an atmosphere conducive to reconciliation and good neighbourly relations are of utmost importance. The normalization of relations between Kosovo and Serbia remains the only way to ensure security and stability in the region. Dialogue and collaboration are key. This approach would also have a positive effect on the entire Western Balkans. Therefore, we stress the importance of both parties respecting all agreements reached under the EU-facilitated dialogue, including the agreement on the path towards normalization of relations reached in Ohrid last year. We urge them to fulfill their respective obligations under it. The formation of the Association of Serb-majority municipalities will be especially instrumental in the normalization process, and we hope to see work on this advance swiftly in the coming months. This is the only path that leads towards EU membership. We once again reiterate Malta's continued full support to Serbia and Kosovo's EU accession aspirations. To this end, the EU-facilitated dialogue remains of paramount importance. It is crucial that both sides commit to this process and respect it. Any actions of consequence must be duly discussed in a transparent way with all stakeholders and appropriately negotiated through the EU-facilitated dialogue framework. Moreover, Malta underscores the need for the continuation of the reform process in Kosovo and the full participation of various stakeholders from within civil society, including vulnerable and marginalized communities. The full, equal, meaningful, and safe participation of women in the political sphere and decision-making process must also be at the heart of such efforts. In conclusion, Madam President, we urge Kosovo and Serbia to prioritize dialogue and avoid any confrontational actions or decisions that could aggravate the already tense situation in the region. We hope that the coming period will be marked with meaningful progress in the efforts to normalize relations. We call for a serious commitment from both sides to respect their obligations and take tangible steps towards a peaceful and mutually beneficial resolution to the situation. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Malta for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of the United States.
Thank you, Madam President. Thank you, Special Representative Zayadeh, for your briefing, and I'd like to acknowledge President Vučić and Prime Minister Curtin. The United States remains committed to peace and stability in the Western Balkans, including through our support for the NATO Kosovo Forces peacekeeping mission in line with this UN mandate. It is our goal, alongside European partners and other stakeholders, to foster democracy, regional economic integration, vibrant multi-ethnic societies, and rule of law. To that end, we ask both Kosovo and Serbia to refrain from uncoordinated or escalatory actions, and we urge them to return to the EU-facilitated dialogue, which the United States continues to strongly support. To be clear, it is the EU-facilitated dialogue, not the UN Security Council, that should be the channel for resolving issues related to the normalization of relations between Kosovo and Serbia, including solutions that respect the rights of all communities. Still, the United States has expressed concerns with Kosovo's plan for enforcing the Central Bank of Kosovo's amended regulations on cash transactions. The decision was taken without adequate preparation or consultation with the local population. And so we once again call for enforcement of this plan to be immediately postponed until satisfactory procedures in line with European standards and practices of good governance are in place, and the affected population has been sufficiently educated on the process this transition will follow. Interruptions to the distribution of social benefits from Serbia must be minimized until the transition is complete, and we look to the Serbian government to cooperate in this effort. We're also deeply concerned about recent uncoordinated actions the government of Kosovo has undertaken, including law enforcement operations at the offices of the Serbia-supported institutions in municipalities in Western Kosovo and the NGO Center for Peace and Tolerance in Pristina. These actions are inconsistent with Kosovo's commitment to work through the EU-facilitated dialogue to address issues that affect the welfare of the Serb minority community, and they undermine the path to normalization between Kosovo and Serbia. Once again, the Security Council is not the place to resolve these issues. We reiterate our call for both parties to engage through the EU-facilitated dialogue. But while we're here, we must also draw the Council's attention to acute threats to security and stability coming from outside Kosovo. The United States reiterates our condemnation of the coordinated, violent Serb paramilitary attacks on the Kosovo police near the Banjiska monastery on September 24th, which resulted in a tragic death of a Kosovo police sergeant. 4 months have elapsed since this attack, and Serbia has yet to hold accountable those involved in its planning and execution. Indeed, the self-proclaimed leader of the attack remains at large in Serbia. We again call on Serbia to pursue full accountability for the perpetrators and organizers of the September 24 attack. Serbia must also work with KFOR to ensure that another attack like this cannot happen again. To close, it bears reiterating one more time that the EU-facilitated dialogue is the best mechanism to reconcile issues between Kosovo and Serbia and end the cycle of crisis. The agreement on the path to normalization between Kosovo and Serbia and its implementation annex, which both parties agreed to last year, are legally binding commitments, and they serve as a roadmap for each party to de-escalate tensions and urgently move forward on their respective European paths. Thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of the United States for their statement. I now give the floor to the representative of the United Kingdom.
Thank you, President. And I thank Special Representative Ziadeh for her briefing today. I also welcome the participation of President Vučić and Prime Minister Kurti in our meeting. President, next week marks the 19th anniversary of Kosovan independence. The UK welcomes the progress it has made as a sovereign state in that time. And yet for many years, the absence of a normal relationship between Kosovo and Serbia has had implications for regional stability and for communities in both countries. Current tensions reinforce the importance for Kosovo and Serbia to engage with renewed commitment in the EU-facilitated dialogue and to make progress towards the normalisation of relations. The UK will continue to work in support of this goal alongside our wider efforts to build regional stability. 3 immediate steps can help support this goal. First, Kosovo and Serbia should honour their existing commitments and avoid unilateral actions or rhetoric that could reduce prospects for a comprehensive and sustainable normalisation agreement. Second, Kosovo should exercise its sovereign powers in a way that is consistent with the vision of a multi-ethnic democracy embedded at the heart of Kosovo's constitution. Through its recent actions, Kosovo's central bank has sought to fulfil its responsibility to regulate the operation of foreign currencies. But the Kosovo government's implementation of these measures so far has shown insufficient regard for the impact on Kosovo's minority communities. Kosovo's authorities should set out a clear plan to ensure that all affected Kosovo Serbs can continue to receive their incomes and that essential services can operate until a sustainable solution is found. Finally, President, the UK calls on Serbia to ensure that those responsible for the attacks in Banjska in September are held to account. Regional stability and the interests of all communities are best served by the creation of a conducive environment that will allow further progress under the EU-facilitated dialogue. Thank you.
I thank the representative of the United Kingdom for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of China.
Madam President, I welcome the presence of His Excellency President Vučić of Serbia at today's meeting. I listened carefully to SISG Caroline Ziadeh's briefing and the statement of Mr. Kurti. The PISG in Pristina recently issued a ban on the Serbian dinar, closed down some Serbian institutions, and conducted violent searches against Serbs in northern Kosovo. These unilateral actions have had an immense impact on the livelihoods of the Serbs, causing mass panic and creating tensions which China finds gravely concerning. Escalated tensions and more acute inter-ethnic antagonism in Kosovo threaten regional peace and stability and serve no one's interests. We call on the PISG to show restraint and urge them to revoke their unjustified and unreasonable decisions and cease and desist without delay from any moves that may aggravate the situation so that normality can return to the life of the Serbian residents in Kosovo. The Kosovo issue bears on the peace and stability in the Balkans and in Europe as a whole. China's position on this issue has been consistent. As we see it, unilateral actions are not helpful in solving the Kosovo issue, nor conducive to the region's peace and stability. We support the parties in their effort to reach a mutually acceptable political solution through dialogue within the framework of Council Resolution 1244. In this process, the sovereignty, independence, and territorial integrity of Serbia must be fully respected. The fact that different ethnic groups live side by side in Kosovo has its roots in history, and the right to survival and development of all communities should be protected. Tolerance, reconciliation, and harmonious coexistence in Kosovo serve the long-term and fundamental interests of all parties. Confronting and locking horns against each other never was and never will be the way out. We call on all the parties to resolve their differences through pragmatic and constructive dialogue and negotiation, and to continue creating more and more enabling conditions for a proper settlement of the Kosovo issue. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of China for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Slovenia.
Thank you very much, Madam President. We thank the SRSG and the head of UNMIC, Ms. Carolina Ziare, for her briefing. We also extend our gratitude to the President of Serbia, Vučić, and to the Prime Minister of Kosovo, Kurti, for being here and for the statements. Slovenia is strongly committed to strengthening security and stability in the Western Balkans. Let me voice our position in the following points. Both sides need to continue their commitment to the EU-facilitated dialogue and to the normalization of the relations under the auspices of the EU. We believe that both Serbia and Kosovo have a place in the European Union. Our support for their aspirations for the European integration remains unwavering. At the same time, we wish to stress that progress in this dialogue and the normalization of relations are essential if they still aspire to join the EU. Madam President, we take note of the regulation by the Central Bank of Kosovo aimed at enhancing financial transparency and combating money laundering. In this regard, we express concern about the potential impact on financial support to Kosovo Serbs from Serbia. We would advise the Kosovo government to inform and consult Kosovo Serbs about the decisions that affect their lives in advance of making such decisions. We appreciate recent discussions with Belgrade and Pristina within the EU-facilitated dialogue on this matter. Additionally, we take note of Kosovo's recent decision to allow for a transitional period and to ensure that the opening of new accounts in euro currency will be free of charge. Kosovo should provide all necessary information and support to ensure a smooth transition. Furthermore, we call on both sides to refrain from any unilateral action that may impede the ongoing efforts towards normalization of relations. Third, some concerns remain with the slow progress of the report on the attack in Banjska last September. Perpetrators of that attack must be held accountable. We also underscore that violence against KFOR personnel is equally unacceptable. Strengthening independent judiciary and rule of law institutions is crucial to ensure accountability. Madam President, Serbia and Kosovo can work together. We commend the recent agreement on mutual recognition of vehicle license plates and encourage both sides to take further positive steps. In time of increased tensions, it is imperative for both parties to step back, foster trust, and engage through diplomatic means towards reconciliation and peace. The implementation of existing commitments must be swift and without preconditions. In conclusion, Madam President, we call on Belgrade and Pristina to implement the agreement on the path to normalization between Kosovo and Serbia and its implementation annex. This action will be the most productive pathway forward for the well-being of people in both parties involved. And finally, I want to express our gratitude for the work carried out by the UNMIC and KFOR. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Slovenia for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Algeria.
Thank you, Madam President. I welcome the presence at today's meeting of His Excellency Mr. Aleksandar Vučić, President of the Republic of Serbia, and I thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Madam Caroline Ziadek, for her briefing. The recent financial decision taken by Pristina is worrying as it could have a negative impact on Serbs living in Kosovo, who receive payments, financial assistance, and social benefits from Serbia. This unilateral decision, taken without prior consultation with Serbian authorities, might have a severe impact on many hospitals and schools providing essential services to the Serbs living in the region, which functioning depends heavily on Serbia's funding. This action may dangerously raising ethnic tensions and risking further escalation in an already tense context. They could undermine the fragile stability in Kosovo and might seriously hinder efforts towards normalization and maintaining peace and security in the region. Against this backdrop, Algeria would like to deliver three messages. First, it is urgent to avoid escalation and to refrain from any action that might lead to ethnical tensions in Kosovo, as it is urgent to allow the Serbs to receive their financial dues without delay or obstruction. Second, restoring trust between the two sides and ensuring effective representation of Serbs in the local institution is of utmost importance. Sudden and unilateral measures not only hinder the stable status quo, but could also produce uncontrolled escalation and the risk of a regional spillover. In this respect, we call on the authorities in Kosovo to undertake the necessary steps and measures to establish the association and community of Serb municipalities, as agreed upon in the 2013 Brussels Agreements. Third, we commend the effort of the Special Representative of the Secretary General, Madam Caroline Ziadek, and reiterate the vital role of UNMIK in stabilizing the situation on the ground. We also appreciate the EU-facilitated dialogue aiming at advancing the political process toward a peaceful settlement of this conflict, in line with the principle of subsidiarity between the UN and the regional organization. Finally, Algeria believes that constructive and genuine dialogue remains the only viable path and support all efforts to reach a mutually acceptable solution to the issue within the framework of UNSC Resolution 1244 with full respect of the principle enshrined in the UN Charter. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Algeria for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of France.
Madam President, I thank the SRSG for her briefing, and I also welcome with us the President of Serbia, Aleksandar Vučić, and the Prime Minister of Kosovo, Mr. Kurti. Madam President, France recalls the need to stabilize the situation on the ground and to work towards normalizing relations between Serbia and Kosovo. This is a central element for European rapprochement for both countries. Both parties must abstain from any unilateral action which might increase tensions. On that point, France and the European Union have expressed their serious concern at the recent actions by Kosovo on the currency and the Kosovar police operations, leading to the closure of Serbian parallel structures in the south and east of Kosovo. These decisions will have negative consequences on the daily life of the Serbian community in Kosovo, and particularly on access to social services. France reiterates its call for the immediate suspension of this decision by the Central Bank of Kosovo in order to allow for sufficient transition period. The statement yesterday by the Prime Minister Kurti, who recognized that a transitional period was necessary, is an initial positive step. It must be reflected in action now. France also recalls that the status of the Serb parallel structures must be exclusively resolved through the establishment of an association of Serb majority municipalities. This has been expected from the Kosovo authorities for quite some time. we continue to follow this point very closely. And moreover, we condemn the attacks in Banjska the 24th of September, and we call for light to be shed on all circumstances. Those who are responsible must be brought to justice. Madam President, France reaffirms its support for the perspective of European integration for Serbia and Kosovo. No one can deny the sovereign will of both countries to favor the European choice. There is no alternative either for Serbia or Kosovo than to resolve their disputes once and for all. It is solely within EU-facilitated dialogue that these problems can be resolved. And we recall that the European Union was entrusted with this mandate by the UN General Assembly. France welcomes mediation efforts by the EU, which led to the so-called Brussels Audit Agreement at the beginning of December of 2023. This is the most ambitious agreement to date between the two countries. It is a major success, and we must work together to ensure its full implementation. We also recognize as an encouraging sign progress achieved in the EU-facilitated dialogue, in particular on mutual recognition of license plates, on the issue of energy, and on the holding of municipal elections in the north of Kosovo with the participation of Serbs. We welcome the constructive involvement of Serbian authorities in the dialogue, which has led to considerable progress. Serbia must continue to make clear-cut progress in implementing its obligations under the Brussels Audit Agreement and its annex. Madam President, France welcomes the role of UNMIK and KFOR. Attacks against KFOR, as well as the attacks last May, are unacceptable. France will continue to support EU mediation aimed at achieving a comprehensive, definitive, and legally binding agreement. And finally, it calls on the Serbian and Kosovo leaders to respect their commitments and to shoulder their responsibility. Thank you.
I thank the representative of France for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Mozambique.
Madam President, Mozambique wishes to thank the Guyana Presidency for convening this open briefing on the situation in Kosovo. We also thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General and the head of the United Nations Interim Administration Mission in Kosovo for our insights. My delegation recognizes the presence in this chamber of His Excellency the President of the Republic of Serbia and Mr. Kurt. Madam President, the facts reported in the letter of 5 February 2024, addressed by the Serbian government to the Presidency of the Security Council, are concerning. Those facts described, particularly the atrocities against civilians, are regrettable. They are contrary to the international law and international humanitarian law. Mozambique is not in favor of any action by any actor that deprive populations from basic needs and resources for their survival. In this regard, we urge the parties in the conflict to measure the impact of their decisions and refrain from actions contrary to the spirit of Security Council Resolution 1244 and the Charter of United Nations. The promotion of peace and reconciliation in Kosovo and in the region at large is of paramount importance. This contributes for the preservation of the progress made over years by the parties. Mozambique commends the diplomatic effort led to the agreement between Belgrade and Pristina, well known as the Agreement on the Path to Normalization between Kosovo and Serbia. This agreement is a milestone achievement which was facilitated by the European Union. We see it as a clear example of the central role that regional organizations can play in promotion of international peace and security. We encourage the European Union to continue engaging with the parties in the implementation of this agreement. Madam President, Mozambique calls on the Republic of Serbia and Kosovo to remain fully committed to the process of normalizing relations between Belgrade and Pristina through promoting meaningful dialogue and avoiding unilateral actions that may further contribute to the escalations of tensions. The framework of dialogue facilitated by European Union, based on 2010 United Nations General Assembly resolution, is one of those constructive paths to achieve peace, security, and stability. Particularly, we call the parties to make every effort to find solutions by political and diplomatic means. The participations of key actors and stakeholders, including women, young, and civil society, is important for success of reconciliation process. Continued engagement by international community is also critical in this process of building peace. Madam President, Mozambique reiterates it is unwavering support to the United Nations Interim Administration Mission in Kosovo and to the efforts made by regional actors aimed at promoting peace and stability in Kosovo, Metohija, and the region in general. I thank you, Madam President.
I thank the representative of Mozambique for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Japan.
Madam President, I thank Special Representative of the Secretary General, Ms. Caroline Ziade, for her briefing. I would like to extend a warm welcome to President Vučić and Prime Minister Kurti to the Security Council. Japan has built a long-standing friendship with both of your countries. As friends, we are concerned about the current situation in Kosovo. Any actions that could lead to further escalation should be avoided for the sake of the people in the region. Madam President, we note the recent regulation of the Kosovo Central Bank, KCB, on cash operations. This measure was implemented as part of the fight against counterfeit money and money laundering to ensure transparency of cash flows in Kosovo. Having said so, we are concerned about the impact of the regulation on the everyday lives of the many Kosovo Serbs who use the Serbian currency and may therefore be disadvantaged. We understand that Kosovo, as a sovereign nation, requires such measures. However, policies that directly affect the lives of citizens should not be rushed but approached with full and transparent communication. Thus, we echo the messages coming from embassies and other members of the international community to Kosovo to proceed with caution in order to avoid increasing tensions by addressing the impact of the regulation. Madam President, taking this opportunity, we reiterate that the normalization of relations between the two countries through the EU-facilitated Belgrade-Pristina dialogue will contribute to peace and stability in the Western Balkans. In this regard, the issues raised today should also be discussed further in the framework of that dialogue. In conclusion, Japan remains committed to supporting the international community's efforts to promote peace, stability, and reconciliation in the region. We stand ready to work with all stakeholders to achieve this goal. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Japan for their statement. I give the floor to the representative of Switzerland.
Madam President, I thank the Special Representative of the Secretary General for her statement. I would like to welcome Their Excellency President Vučić and Prime Minister Kurti. Your presence here today testifies the importance you attach to this discussion. In this time of tension, measured and careful words and actions are called for. We call for your personal commitment. The call reflects Switzerland's deep commitment to peace, economic development, security in Western Balkans. For a quarter of a century, we have been working alongside numerous national and international actors to achieve this, including reconciliation and easing of interethnic relations. Progress has been made in terms of coexistence. However, these advances are now threatened by deep-seated tensions. And these tensions reached a new level with the attack in Banska last September. Switzerland reiterates its support for KFOR, which has prevented the situation from further deteriorating. We call on Serbia to ensure that those involved in the Banska attacks are held accountable. And de-escalation efforts must continue as a matter of urgency. Serbia and Kosovo have a responsibility to refrain from measures and actions that could aggravate the situation. There are paths to rebuild trust, and they exist. The dialogue facilitated by the European Union is the framework within which both parties can and must address contentious issues. And this includes the issues that have brought us together today, namely the implementation of the new regulation introduced by the Central Bank of Kosovo. Switzerland acknowledges the legitimacy of the objectives pursued by this regulation, notably the transparency of financial flows and the fight against counterfeiting and money laundering. We share, however, the concerns about the communication regarding the bank's decision and especially its short-term implementation. Uncoordinated actions with impacted populations perceived as a deliberately restrictive measure towards a particular ethnic group can undermine trust. The announcement by the Kosovo government and central bank that a transitional period is planned, along with enhanced communication, is therefore commendable. Switzerland calls on the Kosovo authorities to implement these commitments and to promptly strengthen dialogue with the Serbian population of Kosovo directly affected by this regulation. Madam President, greater efforts by Kosovo and Serbia are needed to find compromises. Building good neighborly relations requires both parties to implement their commitments under the Brussels Agreement and the Ohrid Agreement of 2023. We welcome the progress made in this respect, including mutual recognition of vehicle license plates, as well as steps towards implementation of the energy agreements. We encourage both parties to continue along this path and to make progress towards normalizing relations in good faith. Switzerland is ready to continue contributing to the normalization process. We remain firmly convinced that this process is the way to peaceful and prosperous multi-ethnic societies. I thank you.
I thank the representative of Switzerland for this statement. I give the floor to the representative of the Republic of Korea.
Thank you, Madam President. I also thank SRSG Caroline Ziadeh for her briefing. My delegation also warmly welcomes Presidents Alexander Vučić and Prime Minister Albin Kurti to the Council. Madam President, when Serbia and Kosovo agreed to resume negotiations to normalize relations based on the EU proposal in February of last year, it was welcomed by international community, including the Republic of Korea. Korea hopes for reconciliation and peace and prosperity in the region, which has experienced a turbulent and heartbreaking history in modern times. Indeed, we all hoped that and expected that last year's agreement would lead to a resolution of the long-standing confrontation and conflict in the region through the lessening of tensions and advancements of the critical dialogue. However, it is regrettable that the parties have not made significant progress on the implementation of the agreement on the path to the normalization to date. Rather, the situation in the northern region of Kosovo, where over 100,000 ethnic Serbians live, is worsening due to sporadic incidents that are compounding tensions on the ground. The recent regulation of Kosovo Central Bank on currency transactions constitutes a cause for concern in terms of its impact, even if we acknowledge that it is intended to enhance financial stability and transparency in Kosovo. The implementation of the regulation may have a direct and negative impact on the ability of Serbian residents of Kosovo to lead their daily lives and access basic social services. The Republic of Korea welcomes the decision of Kosovo to suspend the implementation of the regulation. In addition, my delegation believes that such issues should be faithfully discussed further within the frame of the EU facilitated dialogue. Madam President, the Republic of Korea supports a peaceful resolution of the issues related to Kosovo and Serbia through political dialogue and negotiations. We reiterate our support for the EU's efforts and its role in the mediation. In this connection, we also call all two sides to refrain from provocative statements and unilateral actions, take concrete steps to reduce tensions and build trust in the region, and actively participate in the EU-led negotiations with a view to normalize relations. Lastly, my delegation commends the entire staff of UNMIC and other key international partners for their tireless efforts to ensure peace and stability in the region. I thank you, Madam.
I thank the representative of the Republic of Korea and now give the floor to the representative of Sierra Leone.
Madam President, I thank you for convening this meeting. Let me also thank Ms. Caroline Zed, the Special Representative and Head of the United Nations Interim Administrative Mission in Kosovo, for our informative briefing. I acknowledge the presence of His Excellency Mr. Aleksandar Vučić, President of Serbia, and Mr. Albin Kurti. I welcome their participation in this meeting under Rules 37 and 39, respectively, of the Provisional Rules of Procedure of the Security Council. Sierra Leone commends UNMIC for its continued engagement with all relevant actors in the promotion of security, stability, the rule of law, and respect for human rights in Kosovo and in the region in line with its mandate. Sierra Leone wishes to underscore the need for the political authorities in Kosovo and Serbia, as appropriate, to take all necessary measures to de-escalate rising tensions within the territory of Kosovo. Consistent with the provisions of Security Council Resolution 1244 and the general principles on a political solution to the Kosovo situation, adopted as Annex 1 to that resolution on 6 May 1999, Sierra Leone calls on the political leadership of Kosovo and Serbia to constructively engage in dialogue to ensure the attainment of critical institutional reforms, to engender peace and normal life for all inhabitants of Kosovo, and the advancement of regional stability in the Western Balkans. Promoting inter-community trust building, respect for human rights and the rule of law, gender equality, empowerment of women and youth is critical at resolving any conflict or rising tensions. With respect to the current political tension associated with the decision of the authorities in Kosovo to phase out the Serbian dinar currency used by Kosovo's Serbian minority, Sierra Leone welcomes the announcement of the suspension of the implementation of the decision. The suspension will allow for the necessary dialogue and engagement on the critical issues. The approach is necessary to de-escalate tensions, discourage actions that will lead to conflict, and facilitate national reconciliation, which is critical to maintaining peace, security, and well-being of all sections of the Kosovo population. Durable peace and security can only be secured through compromise arrived at with dialogue. In this regard, we take note of the European Union facilitated dialogue to establish conditions for the normalization of relations between Serbia and Kosovo. Madam President, Sierra Leone counts on the good offices of the Special Representative of the Secretary General and Head of UNMIC and the European Union facilitated dialogue, as well as the mediation overtures of other stakeholders to work concertedly to normalize relations between the two parties. We urge the political leadership of both parties to commit to the implementation of the Brussels Agreement of 2013 and the European Union brokered proposal of 27 February 2023, which outlined the path to normalization of relations between Serbia and Kosovo, as well as the annex to that agreement agreed on 18 March 2023. Sierra Leone encourages the party to work together to mutually address issues heightening suspicion and division among different segments of the communities in Kosovo. To achieve this outcome, we encourage the authorities to take the necessary measures to maintain viable channels of communication. We affirm the call on political leaders on both sides to embark on initiatives aimed at addressing critical issues that can reduce tensions and to take all necessary steps to address the security, political, and socio-economic concerns of all segments of the society. This must be the case regardless of ethnic, linguistic, or political background. The political authorities have the overall responsibility to foster purposeful and concerted actions towards sustainable peace. In concluding, Madam President, Sierra Leone calls on the political leadership in Kosovo and Serbia to exercise caution and restraint. This is to diffuse tensions and pursue the path for dialogue to attain peaceful resolution of all disputing issues. Sierra Leone, as a post-conflict country, has shown that peace can be achieved through dialogue, compromise, and mutual understanding. As Albert Einstein observed, and I quote, "Peace cannot be kept by force. It can only be achieved by understanding." End of quote, and I thank you.
I thank the representative of Sierra Leone for their statement, and I give the floor to the representative of Ecuador.
Muchas gracias.
Thank you very much, Madam President. I'd like to thank SRSG Ziade for her detailed briefing, and I welcome with us the presence of the President of the Republic of Serbia, as well as the Prime Minister of Kosovo. The various disputes and the series of incidents hampering dialogue between Belgrade and Pristina have negatively impacted the communities in the region, and that is well known. The recent measure providing for the exclusive use of the euro in financial transactions, doing away with the use of the Serbian dinar in areas predominantly inhabited by ethnic Serbs, has left the international community with many questions, particularly because of the possible impact it will have on public service institutions, as well as on schools and hospitals, and also on the many ways in which it will impact the basic rights of the communities in question. And therefore, it is very important to address the humanitarian and security concerns affecting the population in the region in line with the founding principles of the UN Charter and the relevant Security Council resolutions, particularly Resolution 1244. In this context, it is also essential to avoid any action or rhetoric which could exacerbate tensions or could lead to instability in the region. Protecting the rights and the well-being of all communities must be a priority. As the Secretary General has stated, in order to achieve viable and sustainable agreements, both parties must maintain an open, transparent, and inclusive process which takes account of the various needs and expectations of all interested parties, including women, youth, and stakeholders from civil society. I reiterate Ecuador's acknowledgement for the work done by UNMIC to promote dialogue and maintain stability in the region in coordination with international partners. We welcome your commitment to respecting and protecting human rights in all communities, including the principle of equality and non-discrimination. In conclusion, Madam President, Ecuador encourages the resolution of pending questions within the EU-facilitated dialogue framework. We call on the parties to meet their commitments, including by creating an association of Serb-majority municipalities. The stability in the Western Balkans is crucial for European and global security, and therefore we must avoid an escalation of tension. Thank you.
I thank the representative of Ecuador for their statement. I shall now make a statement in my national capacity as the representative of Guyana. I thank SRSG Caroline Zieda, head of the UN Interim Administration Mission in Kosovo, UNMIK, for her insightful briefing. I also welcome the presence of His Excellency Alexander Vučić, President of the Republic of Serbia, and His Excellency Albin Kurti, Prime Minister of Kosovo, and their respective delegations at today's meeting. Guyana is deeply troubled by the rising tensions and incidents that have been reported and call on all parties to take steps to bring calm and to return to active dialogue in the interest of ensuring stability for the peoples of both Kosovo and Serbia, as well as the wider region. We are also concerned about the recent events in Kosovo and their possible negative consequences on the lives and well-being of members of the ethnic Serb minority community in Kosovo. It is imperative that all parties act responsibly and in a manner that respects the human rights of all. Guyana underscores the importance of promoting policies that are responsive to the needs and concerns of all persons, including ethnic minorities. We welcome the efforts by the European Union in facilitating the ongoing dialogue between the parties and believe that this mechanism remains a critical avenue for ensuring the achievement of a final resolution that will allow all the people of Kosovo and of Serbia to live side by side in peace and prosperity. While we were encouraged by the progress made early last year through the dialogue, we are deeply concerned by the ongoing gridlock and possible reversal in advancement towards implementation of the agreed provisions of the February 2023 agreement on the path to normalization. Guyana supports a multi-ethnic democratic Kosovo that receives international recognition and that can become a full member of the international multilateral system. This can only be achieved through renewed commitment to the EU-led Belgrade-Pristina dialogue and through Kosovo's dedication to the enforcement of principles of democracy, the protection of human rights of all its population, and respect for the rule of law. I thank you. I now resume my function as President of the Council. There are no more names. I see the Secretariat approaching. His Excellency President Vučić, President of the Republic of Serbia, has asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give him the floor and respectfully ask that this second intervention be brief. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam President. We'll be as brief as it is possible. First of all, thank you all for participating in this discussion. I would like to emphasize a few facts. Number one, I wanted to say that Serbia will do everything that is possible to be done to keep peace, stability and tranquility in the region, as we have always been doing. I was referring to all of you with, I believe, the real facts and arguments without ad hominem ad personam, insults, scoffings and scoldings, and will continue so. Speaking about facts that were allegedly mentioned here about Serbia supporting counterfeiting, money laundering, criminal activities and everything else. I will depict to you this situation just in one example, and everything will be very clear to you. It was said here that Serbs are bringing sex through administrative line, or some of you would say border lines between Serbia and Kosovo. And that's how we influence, how we make a big impact on criminals in the north of Kosovo or in the other areas of Kosovo. Just for you to know. You know who does it. Who brings those sacks? Not Serbs, but Brits instead of us. They're authorized and specialized company, Henderson. They're doing a legal job, don't worry. We paid to them. We engaged Brits. The name of the company is Henderson. They transfer our money to Kosovo in those sacks. Just for you to see how transparent we are. Although Brits, as you know, have already recognized Kosovo's independence. And when you speak about suspension and saying good things about suspension of implementation of the abolishment of dinner, I need to tell you that it's not true at all. To our Korean, Sierra Leone's, and all the other friends that have just mentioned that. Because they stopped the car, which were run by Henderson Company, which were bringing money for pensions, salaries, and of course social beneficiaries as well. Number two, here you heard, and it's good, that some of people, as the citizens of Serbia, wanted to speak about Serbian democratic life. They were saying that we were torturing and at the end paralyzing the opposition leader in Serbia. The name of a man is, as they said, Mr. Sandulovic. No one in Serbia has ever heard of that participant in political life in Serbia. Once he participated in elections and he got 0.01%. Once upon a time. Speaking about facts. Now, coming back to the real issues. Here, most of those countries that not in adherence with the UN Charter and UN Resolution 1244 have recognized Kosovo's independence, try to find a sufficient excuse and justification for everything that Pristina was doing, and a fact that something happened on 24th of September, which we as a state condemned. But someone has to explain and someone has to say what has really happened and why I was not mentioning that in my intervention. First of all, it's not good that we didn't hear anything about killing attempts of Serbian kids because they were carrying Christmas tree, and some other people as well. But you need to know that 10 months before that Banjska case, we were negotiating with European Union and United States of America. And we tried to please, and we were begging Serbs to leave, to remove themselves from the barricades they raised because of constant, systematic, and systemic attacks made by Pristina against them. And I was taking by myself all the guarantees from United States of America and European Union, and was trying to persuade, was trying to convince Kosovo Serbs to accept those guarantees. They came to that meeting to me and they said to me, we believe you, but we don't believe them. They're going to violate and they're going to forget everything, and we are going to be hunted as wild hares. And I said to them, I cannot get more. We need to believe to our American and our European partners. They said to me, we'll do it, but we still don't believe that they will respect, they will obey what they promised to us. As a matter of fact, 3 months after that, Pristina authorities started hunting Serbs that were erecting those barricades. And that was one of the reasons why those people that were born, that were living an entire their life in Kosovo, wanted to defend their own thresholds, their own families. Did they do it rightfully? I don't believe that. But you need to know the real reasons. Even after that, we started the process of investigation. and we'll see in indictments. But someone has to understand that according to UN Charter and Resolution 1244, the only territorial integrity that's been violated, it's Serbia's territorial integrity. There are no other countries that there has been any kind of territorial integrity violations. And finally, I need to thank to 109 countries within the United Nations that did not recognize Kosovo's independence, to those 109 nations in the world that stick to the UN Charter, Resolution 1244, and also to say, because here it was mentioned that Serbia is an extended hand of Russia. As a president, proud president of Serbia, I am saying to all of you, and as you can see, it's easy for me to look at your eyes and to say that Serbia is an independent, sovereign, freedom-loving country, that we are not puppets of anyone, neither of United States of America, Russia, or any other country in the world, and that will remain so. And that's why I'm so proud that I saw our beautiful flag hoisted here in front of this building of the United Nations. Thank you once again for listening to me and for giving me an opportunity to speak to you. Thanks a lot.
I thank His Excellency, Mr. Vučić, for his statement. Mr. Albin Kurti has also asked for the floor to make a further statement. I give him the floor and also respectfully ask that he keeps the intervention brief.
Thank you, Madam
sir.
President. Dinar has not been banned in Kosovo. Serbian citizens, and not only them, they can have dinars. You can own dinars, but euro is the only currency as means of payment. In previous century, before liberation, we had dinar as means of payment. We were under occupation. In 21st century, first we had Deutschmark, German mark, and then after euro. Only euro is means of payment. And we have done so many subsidies, social assistance, we give grants for education and healthcare to Serb majority municipalities, and believe me, they all take euros, no problem. We do not have a single case where a Serbian citizen of Kosovo said, I don't want this money because it is in euro currency. In our neighboring country, in Montenegro, over a quarter of the population declare themselves Serbs. They have euro as currency. Ordinary Serbs are not euro haters. Euro is currency of payment. You can own money in whatever currency you want. And I will do more communication, more information to Serbs in the coming days throughout this month. And I will speak in Serbian so they understand me better and clearly. Because we who were under the occupation of Serbia, we knew the language, Serbian language, but they did not learn our language because we're oppressed and dominated. As you know, throughout the world, similar cases, where the colonizer does not know the language of the colonized, but the colonized knows the language of colonizer. And I will speak in Serbian, that I have nothing against Serbs. I have friends who are Serbs. I have a minister who is a Serb, Nenad Rašić. His deputy is a Serb, Radojica Radomirović. Deputy Ombudsman of Kosovo, Srđan Sentić, is a Serb. My party in the parliament with secret ballot voted Srđan Sentić as Deputy Ombudsman of Kosovo. I have appointed as one of 4 members of board of Trepča, which is biggest company for mines and minerals, Dragiša Krstović from Leposavić, a Serb, a great lawyer. I do not believe that ethnic differences bring conflict. On the contrary, diversity, multiplicity is the state of being. But for political interests, economic interests, ethnic differences can be employed. And we are fighting that. I'm a social democrat who believes in people, who thinks that people are good. Criminals are individuals. No community is a criminal community. I want to be very clear about this. There are such things as criminal structures. But never a community, never a people is criminal. Never. And I don't equalize states with people. We need states, but I believe that people are always even better than states. And I want to communicate and cooperate with Serbs in Kosovo. But we also need Central Bank of Kosovo to communicate and cooperate with National Bank of Serbia. We wrote a letter to them. I hope we're going to get an answer. And believe me, Madam President, converting car plates from KM into RKS was much more difficult, because in RKS, car plates of our republic, you have R for the republic. The conversion is full. They switched from Serbian car plates into Kosovar ones. In Euro, you don't have Republic of Kosovo at all. So if they switch from car plates, it's way more easier and logical to have faster and smoother conversion from dinar into euro as means of payment. There are 4 branches of commercial banks in the northern part of Kosovo. We have 10 commercial banks. 8 are foreign, 2 are Kosovar. 4 of these 10 commercial banks, they have branches in the north, which can be used for exchange. And there are 15 additional financial non-banking institutions for conversion. I have been criticized for unilateral action, but I am Prime Minister because Kosovo is a republic. If my country wouldn't have been a republic, I wouldn't become a Prime Minister. So I defend the interests of a democratic republic. For a bilateral action, in contrast to unilateral, let's sign the agreement that we have agreed upon as text. Mr. Vučić and myself, we agreed on a text on 27th of February last year in Brussels, and implementation annex in Ohrid, North Macedonia on 18th of March. So, yes, we are committed to dialogue, but you know what? We already have an agreement. But in order not to have violation of this agreement, to respect it and to implement it, I'm saying let's do a bilateral action, which would be signing this agreement. So we adhere with our signing to the spirit and the letter of it. Here we have heard a critique, an opposition to NATO intervention, which saved my people. 25 years ago, 19 countries got together to stop the genocide of Milosevic's forces in Kosovo. 19 countries got together to bomb a European country. It must have been very bad. Otherwise, it doesn't happen. Sometimes 19 countries cannot agree on a press release. How come that in 1999, 19 countries agreed to bomb Milosevic's Yugoslavia? It was very bad. And even then, President of the Russian Federation, Boris Yeltsin, knew how bad was the situation in Kosovo. He was talking to former American President, US President Bill Clinton several times per week, trying to find a peaceful solution. It was very bad in my country. NATO intervention saved us. Milosevic died in Hague, facing trial, not waiting for the sentence. So I understand that some of you oppose NATO intervention, but you have to be in my country in the spring of 1999 and to understand at what kind of grave situation we were, a humanitarian catastrophe. ICJ, International Court of Justice, gave an advisory opinion on 22nd of July 2010 and said that declaration of independence of Kosovo did not violate international law. All Security Council resolutions are part of international law. In our planet, there is no higher court than ICJ. And ICJ said that declaration of independence of Kosovo did not violate international law. Within international law is also Resolution 1244 from 1999. So legal debate on justification of our independence is basically over. And the last thing I want to mention is that in all Serbian tabloids these days, we see in front pages fantasizing revenge of Kosovo on Serbs. We are not going to take revenge. Yes, over 10,000 unarmed civilians have been killed, 20,000 women raped, but we are not going to take revenge. I want justice, and justice is justice by not being revenge. So it is very important to emphasize that in order to have peace between Kosovo and Serbia, normal relations, they have to quit fantasizing that we're going to take revenge. We are not going to take revenge. I'm a prime minister who will guarantee that there will be no revenge. Only justice in spite of the background of perpetrators, be they during the war or after it during the peace, for political motives or economic ones. Thank you very much.
I thank Mr. Kurti for his statement, and I have no more names inscribed on the list of speakers. I note that President Vučić is asking for the floor. The presidency had indicated to both parties that we would have one further statement each, and we request that we abide by that if the parties are so inclined. Sir, you don't have the floor at the moment. Yeah, yes. So there being no further. Thank you, everyone. The meeting is adjourned. Thank you.